This is not your typical, well-structured, coherent video essay about a character from a book. Even by my incongruous standards. Perhaps Brandon the shipwright got homesick and built his own Winterfell out of oily black stone. This is a muddling mess of mid-IQ musings. Bloodraven is among my favorite of all George Martin's creations because I cannot write well-structured, coherent video essays about him. I have just got this dark underground river of black water running through a weirwood tree in my mind. So please allow me to adjust your expectations. And welcome to the weirdest part of my brain, the Bloodraven Station. Choo-choo. Ever since Bran Stark's third chapter in A Dance with Dragons, all the way back in 2011, or especially since The Door in 2016, Game of Thrones fans have known that time travel exists in the books. In Book 5, Bran sees the past with his green-seeing ability, and may have even interacted with a younger version of his father. In Game of Thrones, Bran's consciousness visited a younger version of Hodor, and turned him from a giant, promising stable boy into a giant, simple stable boy. But Bran didn't do all this himself. He had a teacher. The last Greenseer is the old man nestled within the roots of a weirwood tree in this cave beyond the wall. His real name is Brynden Rivers, or Bloodraven, the 125-year-old albino bastard son of King Aegon the Unworthy. Bloodraven saw Bran's birth, listened to his first word, and watched as he fell from that tower. Bloodraven visited Bran in his dreams, guiding him north to this cave so that he could impart his green-seeing knowledge on him. "You will never walk again, Bran," the pale lips promised, "but you will fly." The army of the dead loom outside this cave as Bloodraven teaches Bran. Leaf says that Bloodraven has outlived his mortal body, but he has too much to see before he can die. I think the weirwoods are keeping Bloodraven alive long enough for him to show Bran how to harness this magic. Bloodraven has been watching the world work for nearly 50 years. His nephew Egg sent him to the Night's Watch in 233 AC, and he was eventually elected Lord Commander. But in 252, at the age of 77, Bloodraven disappeared on a ranging beyond the wall. So I'm not sure why he appears so young in House of the Dragon, but it was nice to see him regardless. One of Bloodraven's main lessons to Bran comes after the boy thinks his father heard him through the weirwood tree. He heard a whisper on the wind, a rustling amongst the leaves. You cannot speak to him, try as you might. I know, I have my own ghosts, Bran. A brother that I loved, a brother that I hated, a woman I desired. Through the trees I see them still, but no word of mine has ever reached them. The past remains the past. We can learn from it, but we cannot change it. I think this is probably foreshadowing that Bran will be able to change the past, whereas Bloodraven could only see it. But I do wonder what Bloodraven tried to change. Which events and people from his old life did Brynden visit through his green sight, trying to change history? He had around 38 years to himself in that cave before Bran was born, and his focus shifted to luring him north. So who were Bloodraven's ghosts? The brother he loved, the brother he hated, and the woman he desired. Bloodraven had 4 half-brothers, Daeron II, Daemon Blackfyre, Aegor Rivers, and Balerion Otherys. We can safely disregard Balerion since he and Bloodraven have 0 interaction in the books. Aegor Rivers was 3 years older than Bloodraven, but he had to leave King's Landing when Aegon the Unworthy grew tired of his mother, and became infatuated with Bloodraven's mother instead. Aegor was half Bracken, and Brynden is half Blackwood, so the two were natural enemies. Both of them loved their half-sister, Shiera Seastar, but Shiera preferred Brynden. Bloodraven loved Shiera, and Shiera enjoyed playing with him. They slept together, and he asked her to marry him over and over, but she liked making him jealous with other men. Shiera Seastar was the woman Bloodraven desired. When Daemon Blackfyre rebelled, Aegor sided with him, and Brynden sided with Daeron II. Bittersteel and Bloodraven dueled each other twice in 2 different wars, and Aegor even took Brynden's eye. Bloodraven committed most of his life to defeating the Blackfyre rebellions, who were led by his half-brother, so we can be pretty confident that Bittersteel is the brother he hated. So the brother he loved was either Daeron II or Daemon Blackfyre, and honestly, I like either option. Daeron was 22 years older than Brynden, but they had one thing in common. Their father, Aegon the Unworthy, sucked. Maybe Daeron was a father figure to Bloodraven as he grew up in the Red Keep, the same way I theorize that Aemon the Dragon Knight was a father figure to Daeron. Daemon Blackfyre was only 5 years older than Bloodraven, and 17 years younger than Daeron. It stands to reason that Daemon and Brynden grew up together, two bastard sons of the king who were raised at court, and perhaps Daeron was a father figure to them both. In time, however, Aegon the Unworthy's favoritism towards Daemon Blackfyre became apparent, like when he gave Daemon the ancestral sword of Targaryen kings, and spread rumors about Daeron being illegitimate so that he might make Daemon the heir instead. If Bloodraven loved Daemon Blackfyre, that adds a layer of tragedy to the Blackfyre rebellions, and it's exactly the sort of thing George Martin would write about, the human heart in conflict with itself. What was Brynden supposed to do when his brother and perhaps childhood friend Daemon was thrust into a position of opposition against Daeron II, when lords schemed to crown Daemon as king? Of course, Bloodraven went on to kill Daemon Blackfyre and two of his sons on the Redgrass Field. When the opportunity came, Bloodraven did not hesitate to kill the brother he might have loved and end the war. Maybe it was another Stannis-Renly situation, where Stannis says he loved Renly once, and then does a bit of kinslaying anyway. Or it was more straightforward, and Brynden simply loved Daeron, sided with him during the war, and killed the Blackfyres for him. I theorize that Bloodraven, once he became wedded to the trees, thought he could go back in time and stop Daemon Blackfyre from rebelling, thus stopping himself from having to kill him, and stopping the generations of turmoil that came after. It's theorized in-universe that it was Bloodraven who told King Daeron that Daemon was about to rebel. Daemon held a grudge against Daeron for not being allowed to marry Princess Daenerys, who he loved. Lords who hated Daeron's peace with Dorne flocked to Daemon, and he listened to them. Finally, Bittersteel pushed him over the edge of rebellion. If given a do-over, there were so many ways Bloodraven could have avoided the war. Maybe he tried to convince Daeron to let Daemon and Daenerys get married. Maybe he tried to fix his own relationship to Bittersteel and stop Aegon the Unworthy from outcasting the Brackens from King's Landing. Maybe Bloodraven tried to stop himself from warning King Daeron about Daemon's imminent rebellion, if indeed he was wrong in the first place. And although Bloodraven could visit these events and learn from them, he could never change them. Let's dig even deeper. I believe two things are true about Bloodraven. First, he has regrets about the way things went down with Daemon Blackfyre and the generations of war that followed. Second, his top priority is safeguarding the Targaryen prophecy, and the Blackfyres, just like the others, were a threat to that prophecy. If you've seen my Bloodraven content so far, you'll know I've convinced myself that Bloodraven has been trimming the Targaryen line whilst he was still in King's Landing in order to wind up with King Aegon V. Aeg was the fourth son of a king, so that means all of these people had to die before Aeg could ascend the throne. It would be a non-impossible, yet extraordinary coincidence for this to happen naturally, especially considering that Bloodraven was Hand of the King for a good portion of this time. We know that Bloodraven and Aerys I knew about prophecies. We know that Aerys refused to have children, and we know that from Aegon V's line come Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow. So from the start of Aeg's reign, when Bloodraven left King's Landing, what did our Bloodraven try to go back and change? Well, if we assume he told Bran the truth, then the answer is nothing. After trying to visit his ghosts, Daemon Blackfyre, Bittersteel, Shiera Seastar, etc., Bloodraven would have realized he can't change the past. So what? He's just been sitting in a tree for 40 years, waiting until Bran was born? My tinfoil take is that Bloodraven was actually lying to Bran, but I'll get into that later. First, assuming he was just visiting the past, what does Bloodraven know now that could help Bran, Jon, and Daenerys, our three main heroes of the War for the Dawn? Probably. In A Dance with Dragons Bran 3, we get tons of lore about the weirwood trees and the children of the forest, which we can assume Bloodraven has spent years learning about. The children call themselves those who sing the song of the earth. Bloodraven says that the singers taught the first men how to send messages with ravens, except in those days, the ravens would speak the message instead of simply carrying a piece of parchment. I don't think this will be important, but I do think it's kind of cool. Bloodraven may have answers to some of the mysteries we all like to theorize about, which is fun. I have an entire video about what might have caused the doom of Hardhome 600 years ago. That's something Bloodraven can tell us if it's relevant. We know that before Hardhome was destroyed, when it was still a settlement of free folk, a maester named Willis traveled there and learned its local customs before having to flee in mortal danger when his protector Gorm was killed in a drunken brawl. Back in the Citadel, Maester Willis wrote a book about Hardhome and then vanished. The last time he was seen was on the docks, looking for a ship to take him back north. So after barely escaping with his life, something compelled Willis to go back there and learn more. I doubt the wildlings themselves could be that interesting, so I suspect some sort of magic existed at Hardhome before the Doom. Maester Aemon spent years at the Citadel, and probably knows about Maester Willis. Aemon and Bloodraven went to the Wall at the same time, so maybe Aemon told Bloodraven about it. And years later, after he was wedded to the trees, Bloodraven decided to find the answer. If this answer has something to do with the lore of the others, like perhaps some sacrifices being performed there, or maybe a stash of dragonglass weapons made from the volcanic activity on its hill, that's something Bloodraven could show Bran. Speaking of secret weapons that can be used to kill White Walkers, there's also an in-universe theory about Jacaerys Valerion's dragon Vermax leaving behind a clutch of dragon eggs at Winterfell. And decades before that, Good Queen Alysanne visited Winterfell with her dragon Silverwing. If Bloodraven visited either of these events through the weirwood net, he could know whether the eggs are real, hidden somewhere deep down in the crypts. Jon Snow has the blood of the dragon and the blood of House Stark, and he has these recurring nightmares about something compelling him in the crypts of Winterfell. So maybe he'll find a dragon egg there thanks to Bloodraven. I'm not sure what Jon would do with a baby dragon hatchling, if he could even hatch it, especially since his aunt Daenerys has 2 relatively grown dragons he could ride instead. But maybe at the end of the Winds of Winter, as winter truly begins and the others march south, George Martin will do a time skip, thus giving Jon's new dragon a few years to grow, while the forces of humanity struggle against the encroaching others. I don't know, this is all tinfoily nonsense, but that's why you love me, right?
It is brilliant American literature, and I don't care what anybody, it should be taught in schools.
Where do White Walkers come from? Well, when a Craster loves his daughter, but the daughter gives birth to a boy, Craster makes a sacrifice of these sons, grandsons to the others. But Craster was only in his 60s or 70s or something. Where did all the White Walkers come from before him? Where did they come from during the first Long Night, thousands of years ago? Are they naturally occurring animals, like humans or children of the forest? Or are the White Walkers always converted from human to other? I have more to say about the origins of the others and their connection to the old gods in my next video, Cult of the Weirwoods. For now, we shall ponder Bloodraven's knowledge and hope that it amounts to something cool. Bloodraven says that the past remains the past. But the thing is, we're almost certain that interactive time travel is possible in A Song of Ice and Fire. Bran does it in Game of Thrones, when he goes back in time to make Hodor his slave. Not that I think we should be looking at Game of Thrones as a bastion of lore-accurate Ice and Fire storytelling, but George Martin has gone on record saying that a version of that Hold the Door scene will occur in the books. So was Bloodraven lying to Bran, or is Bran simply more powerful than Bloodraven? Time travel is tricky business, but it stands to reason that Bloodraven, as a man married to the Weirwoods, which experience the past, present, and future as one non-linear jumble of realities, that Bloodraven would know that Bran, at some point, made Hodor into what he is. Maybe my goat isn't as powerful as I thought. Perhaps Bloodraven couldn't change things from the past, but he could influence things in the present. He's been a tree for half a century, so he could have manipulated the outcome of an event in that time frame, sort of like how G.R. Mormont's Raven shows up at the Night's Watch choosing, and commits election interference for Jon Snow. Bloodraven, is that you? Summerhall happened in 259 AC. That's 7 years after Bloodraven went missing beyond the wall, so that's probably enough time for him to have become the last Greenseer, overseeing his half-great-nephew's reign. If my conspiracy theory is correct, Bloodraven's plan of trimming the Targaryen line until Aeg became king had succeeded. But now he was no longer in King's Landing to ensure the safety of Aeg's reign, and to ensure that the correct son of Aeg succeeded him. Bit of a pickle. Aegon V was a kind and generous king, far too kind and generous towards the small folk. The lords of the realm had no interest in Aeg's social reforms, so Aeg decided that he needed dragons to enforce his rule. He became obsessed with discovering ancient Valyrian lore, and even sent people to Asshai, hoping that the Shadowlands contained some hidden knowledge about hatching dragons. Lots of people believe dragons existed in Asshai before they existed in Valyria, and Asshai is home to practitioners of every type of magic in the world, no matter how depraved. Mirri Maz Duur, the Maegi who Dany believes killed Drogo and Rhaego, actually spent some time in Asshai learning from a blood mage. She passes some of this knowledge on to Dany. Only death can pay for life. So Dany does this huge blood magic ritual in the middle of the Dothraki Sea, and her dragons are born. So maybe Aegon V came to the same conclusion. Blood magic can wake dragons from stone. So he gathered up an undisclosed but probably significant number of Targaryen family members at Summerhall, the royal vacation estate. We're told the blood of the dragon gathered in one. We know Aegon brought 7 dragon eggs, pyromancers, wildfire, and Sir Duncan the Tall. The Targaryens we know for a fact were in attendance are King Aegon himself, his eldest son, Prince Duncan the Small, and Aegon's granddaughter Rhaella, who was 9 moons pregnant. It's exceedingly likely that far more Targaryens than those were in attendance, since Summerhall would be a very useful trimmer for the old Targaryen family bush, since the family is quite small by the time the main series begins. Based on the one other example that we have of blood magic being used to hatch dragon eggs, it seems like Summerhall should have worked, especially if one of the ingredients is a dead baby, since in Dany's case, she had just inadvertently sacrificed her son Rhaego, and probably burned him on the pyre along with Mirri Maz Duur, who was still alive, and Khal Drogo, who Dany had just recently smothered. At Summerhall, Princess Rhaella was pregnant with Rhaegar, and she actually gave birth to Rhaegar outside, as the castle and her family members were burning. I think King Aegon was trying to use baby Rhaegar as a blood sacrifice to wake dragons, and since there were 7 eggs, maybe Aegon wanted all 7 to hatch, and there were 6 other Targaryens there to be sacrificed as well. I'm not sure what Aegon would have done with 7 baby dragons and no Targaryens but himself to ride them, but I suppose the rest could have been allowed to grow up on Dragonstone until Aegon's progeny could claim them. Obviously this didn't work, and Aegon died, and there were no dragons. So maybe Bloodraven warged himself onto the scene in real time, and stopped Aegon from hatching dragons too soon. After all, the prince that was promised would be born from Aegon's line, but wasn't Aegon himself. So Bloodraven removed 2 Targaryens from the scene of the crime, Aerys and Rhaella. Aerys is conspicuously not mentioned to be present at Summerhall, despite the gathering's main purpose, other than the blood sacrifice, was to celebrate the birth of his son, Rhaegar. Either by using one of his annoying verbose ravens,
"Come," the bird squawked, "come, come,"
or inserting a dream into Aerys' brain, Bloodraven ensured the proper line of Aegon stayed safe from the fire. He also had Dunk on the scene to save Rhaella, so that Rhaegar could be born safely to eventually father Jon Snow, and so that both Rhaella and Aerys remained alive to create Daenerys. As long as those 3 survived, Bloodraven was satisfied, and he didn't care about who else died. Of course, before Summerhall, Jaehaerys insisted, against his father's wishes, that his children Aerys and Rhaella be allowed to marry each other, since Jaehaerys was told by a woods witch, the ghost of Highheart, that the prince that was promised would be born of Aerys and Rhaella's line. Is the ghost of Highheart simply a glamour for Bloodraven? Or a Hodor-esque, mind-controlled monster whose purpose was to keep Bloodraven involved in the court lives of House Targaryen from beyond the wall? I don't know, just a theory.
"We're making this shit up."
Alright, my Bloodraven schizo posting is almost done. I told you this video would be stupid. There's just one more prophecy-related event that Bloodraven may have had his claws on: Rhaegar and Lyanna. Bloodraven already succeeded in making Aegon V's line with Betha Blackwood carry House Targaryen into the future. Now, every Targaryen born from their line will carry Blackwood blood. That's the blood of the old gods, and the first men, and 50% of Bloodraven as well, whose mother was Melissa Blackwood. What does Bloodraven need to fulfill the prophecy? Maybe even he isn't certain, but certainly he'd need dragons. Thank you, Dany. And a warrior born of both Valyrian and First Men blood, of both fire magic and ice magic. Thanks Jon and Dany, but especially Jon. To get Jon, Bloodraven needed Rhaegar to fall in love with Lyanna, and he needed Rhaegar to care about the prophecy in the first place. When he was a child, Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him, and he decided that he must become a warrior. He probably found the same scrolls and books and prophecies that Bloodraven himself and King Aerys I had shared an interest in, about 60 years earlier. Later on, Rhaegar decided he was not the prince that was promised, rather his son Aegon would be, and Rhaegar was wrong both times. Let us also consider that Rhaegar and Maester Aemon frequently sent letters to each other. They discussed the prophecy, and Aemon is just now realizing that there was an error in their translation. It didn't have to be a prince that was promised. A princess would work too. Aemon also has this interesting line at the beginning of his Daenerys Epiphany monologue. No one ever looked for a girl. It was a prince that was promised, not a princess. When Aemon says, no one ever looked for a girl, he's probably referring to not just himself and Rhaegar, but to other Targaryens who had been actively searching for the fulfillment of this prophecy. Targaryens like King Aerys and Bloodraven. Recall that Maester Aemon was a young, learned man from the Citadel during Aerys' reign. It's not inconceivable at all that the three of them might have corresponded about the prophecy. And then, after Aegon V ascended the throne, where did Aemon and Bloodraven go? They both went to Castle Black, and lived there together for 19 years before Bloodraven fucked off to become a tree. And he was a tree for Rhaegar's entire life, meaning that Bloodraven could only influence Rhaegar through Maester Aemon, who communicated with Rhaegar often. Together, these two nerdy knuckleheads somehow convinced Rhaegar that he needed to make this prophecy baby with Lyanna Stark. In all likelihood, Lyanna and Rhaegar met in the woods near Harrenhal, during the tourney of Harrenhal, in which Lyanna rode as the Knight of the Laughing Tree. Harrenhal is right next to the ancient Isle of Faces, and it stands to reason that a heart tree or two remain on the mainland. House of the Dragon even put a whole weirwood right in Harrenhal's backyard, which is lore accurate. So perhaps Bloodraven whispered in the wind at Rhaegar through the heart tree where he met Lyanna, and convinced him this was the woman to give him a prophecy baby. Sort of like how Bran whispers through a weirwood at Ned, and Ned might have heard him. And by the way, based on Rhaegar and Maester Aemon's relationship, and the fact that this baby is meant to be the fulfillment of the prophecy they both cared so much about, and the full circle poetry of Maester Aemon providing wisdom to Jon Snow, I conclude with absolute and aggressive certainty that Rhaegar named Lyanna's baby Aemon before he went north and got his shit pushed in by Robert Baratheon's Warhammer. The irony of all this is that none of these weirdos considered a woman could be the princess that was promised. Maester Aemon's dying wish is to be healthy enough to go to Daenerys and guide her back to Westeros, for she who hatched the dragons is the hero humanity needs to defeat the others. Does this mean Jon Snow is pointless, and Bloodraven wasted his time, making Aegon V king for nothing? Well, no, since Dany also comes from Aegon V's line, and also Jon could be the person who lures Dany to come north. I've always said that Game of Thrones is a brilliant adaptation of George's story, and pretty much everything from the later seasons will find its way into the Winds of Winter and beyond. I've always said this. In the TV show, Jon meets Dany on Dragonstone.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
And eventually convinces her to come north and save them by being a total badass who she wanted to fornicate. So maybe in the books, Jon is able to convince Dany to fight the others instead of the Lannisters or Aegon or whoever controls King's Landing. Ultimately, I do think characters have free will in A Song of Ice and Fire. The notion of two mysterious wizards puppet mastering the entire chessboard just isn't what George Martin is writing about. I'm almost positive. In fact, the whole idea that Bloodraven was potentially wrong, like Maester Aemon realized, that Daenerys is the prince that was promised instead of a male heir of Rhaegar, that tells us free will always exists in A Song of Ice and Fire. And even our most magical, prescient characters are not infallible. Daenerys didn't do a blood sacrifice because a prophecy told her to, or because a voice in the wind whispered in her ear. Unless, it would be crazy, but Dany was having a bunch of dragon dreams, and that probably inspired her to try to hatch her eggs. Was Bloodraven sending those dreams to Dany? But my point is that in addition to Bran, Bloodraven has been influencing events throughout history, if not controlling them exactly. For example, maybe Bloodraven trimmed the Targaryen line until he got to Aegon V, but Aegon became obsessed with dragons and blood sacrifice for his own reasons, and Bloodraven needed to ensure that Aerys, Rhaella, and Rhaegar were safe. Maybe Bloodraven knows about dragon eggs in Winterfell, or the true origins of the others, but it will be up to our heroes to make use of that knowledge. Bloodraven isn't hatching any dragons from his weirwood throne. And if, thanks to Bloodraven and Aemon and Rhaegar, both Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen are going to be pieces of the prince that was promised puzzle, it's still up to them to save the world. Dany has to come west, and then north, and probably put her ambition for the Iron Throne on pause. Jon has to be resurrected, and not go too insanely Wolfman mode in his second life, and then lead the North against the others. Let me know in the comments to what extent, if any, you think Bloodraven was involved in any past events. What mysteries do you think he knows the answers to that can help Bran? And keep an eye out sometime in December for a little bit more serious of a video, taking a look at the Weirwood hive mind, where it appears in George Martin's earlier work, and what George might be planning to do with it. And make sure you get subscribed so you'll see my future mad musings when they arrive. Thanks for watching.